bottom. I see red lights. Oh, it's working. Our apologies, folks. This is much more complicated than certainly I can handle. And you saw it took David, Rich, and Adam all together to put it together. Let me open with a word of prayer, please. Father, we thank you that we are here today to hear what Adam Baker has to say. We are thankful that finally all the technical pieces fit together right, and we pray for hearts to hear as well as ears to hear, and we thank Adam, and we thank you for Adam and his being here. Again, thank you, Lord, for this day and for this time together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. It's my privilege to introduce to you Adam, although you've seen him moving around. You know him as well as I do, and he's cool as a cucumber, I would say. And Rich wasn't bad either today, nor was David. Here's what I can tell you about Adam, and please feel free, Adam, to add things if I don't have enough. And I have my cheat sheet because his position is rather long and detailed. He is the Transitional Foster Care Site Supervisor at Bethany Christian Services in Holland. Since 2011, I believe, he has worked with underprivileged and behaviorally challenging youth, for which I give you an A+. There has to be a special place in heaven. As a high school teacher, I can tell you I could never have done that. 5 of these years, he's been focused on refugee minors and the refugee issues, and that's as an associate of the Unaccompanied Refugee Minor, Unaccompanied Children, and Refugee Treatment Foster Care Programs of Bethany Christian Services. In this role, he has worked with local advocates, national policymakers, government officials, and the children themselves from around the world to educate and examine the plight of refugees. His title for today is Journey of Hope. Well, that's up there, a refugee story. And I need to remind you that during the time of questions, I need to hold the mic, and I need to hold it up to your masked face. I apologize for that, but that's the way we have to do things today. Please give Adam a warm Christ Memorial welcome.
Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you bearing with us with some technical difficulties. We got what we got up here, and we're gonna work with it. And yeah, thank you very much for coming out. Thank you to everyone who may be joining online as well. I very much appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to educate yourself, to enrich your own knowledge of refugee issues, of immigration issues, and what that means for us here in the Holland area, even. I want to start by just kind of elaborating on what was already said. My name's Adam Baker. I work at Bethany Christian Services. My title's slightly changed now, actually. Things are always in flux. It's still confusing. If you heard all of those unaccompanied, minor, those things and didn't know what she was talking about, I don't blame you. Hopefully by the end, we have a little more context on those things as well. My title now is Unaccompanied Children's Program Director at the Holland branch of Bethany, right on James Street. Some of you might know where that is. Worked in refugee foster care for 5 years and child welfare for 8 or 9 years at this point, and really found a passion for refugees and this population in particular after starting at Bethany, just after seeing the resiliency that refugees, especially refugee children, show, the just power of character that these kids have that I can't imagine having at their age, and can't imagine going through the things that they went through. So we'll start out, title, Refugee Journeys of Hope. Really a title I like to use for the way it frames these individuals as hopeful. Refugees are a hopeful group. They're looking for a new life. They're looking for a re-beginning, a rebirth, if you will, in a way to save their families, their own lives, the lives of their loved ones. This is an extremely, extremely personal and human topic. It's an extremely broad topic as well. We're going to try to cover a lot of ground in a very short amount of time. One thing I like to say right at the beginning of any type of presentation I do like this is a extremely political issue as well, and there's no way around that. We don't shy away from that at Bethany, and I won't shy away from it here either. That's not to say that I'm here to promote any particular belief. I definitely am not here to advocate for any specific candidate in any race at any time. But there's no getting around the fact that when we talk about immigration and refugees and what that looks like for us here in Holland, we're getting into a lot of the political weeds, a lot of the hot button topics that we're talking about in the world today. And it's worth mentioning and putting it out there that this is hard stuff. This is stuff that people don't always agree on. These are things that are arguments for years, decades, centuries about how we do this in America. So with that, I want to move on and really start at the beginning. What is a refugee? The UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, defines a refugee as someone who has fled their country of origin and is unable or unwilling to return due to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Let's unpack that just very briefly. And I think we're going to have question time at the end, so we'll definitely save that for then. Thank you, though. I appreciate it. Someone who has fled their country of origin. This is a really dry way of saying they lost their home. They have lost everything dear to them. They're leaving everything they know behind and going to a completely foreign place. They are going because they're unable or unwilling to return. What would cause you to be unable or unwilling to return to your own home, to the home you're going to go back to this afternoon? What would cause you to feel like you could never go back there, like there was no longer an option to stay in the home that you may own, you may rent, whatever it might be? It's the place you call home because you feel safe there. They've lost that sense of safety. Refugees don't leave home because they think it might be better on the other side of the border, or they think it might be better across the ocean. They leave home because they have to, because home has been taken from them, because a new home is what they hope for and what they strive for and what will keep them alive. I think of a quote, and the author is escaping me right now. The quote is very roughly, off the top of my head, there is no reason to put your child in a boat into the sea unless the sea is safer than the land. It's very poignant to me, as a lot of refugee youth that I've worked with have had to, in the process of leaving their home, of moving their entire life to a new country, left everything behind, gotten in a boat where they weren't sure if that boat was going to make it to land. They were risking their entire lives for that chance at safety. So we look at the reasons for refugees leaving: race, or persecution based on race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. And really, these are the ways that the UN has found to define a refugee and really put the parameters around how you can be a refugee. You don't become a refugee by knocking on America's door and saying, "Hi, this stuff has happened to me. I'm a refugee. This is what happened to me. Can I come in?" We're going to talk a little bit about what that process means too, but refugees have to be vetted by the UN. They go to refugee camps or refugee centers where they have to apply and go through a vetting process by the United Nations, and then before they come to America or end up in a place like Holland, they're going through a vetting process through the State Department that can take, for families, sometimes a decade. For a lot of the kids I worked with, sometimes they've been living in refugee camps and working through the application process for upwards of 3 years. This is not a quick process. It's not something that happens in a month even. This is long, it's arduous. It takes them really retelling what's happened to them and retelling their story dozens of times to different interviewers who are trying to gauge what their availability is for resettlement. There are currently over 26 million refugees worldwide. This picture, somewhat obscured there on the other side, but that's a picture of a refugee camp in Syria. The number 26 million puts us at the highest number of refugees in recorded history currently. We have the largest refugee crisis in recorded history we're currently living through. A lot of the other issues, I mean, especially right now, we all have masks on. I will after this as well. But sometimes the gravity of this is lost. Just how enormous that is and how dire that is for this many people. 26 million is over the population of a good chunk of countries. I don't remember what state I saw. I believe it's roughly the size of Michigan, 26 million. That's only part of the picture, though. When we move into some of the statistics about and really diving into what that means on a broader scale. Remember, we're talking about refugees. We're talking about people defined as refugees by the United Nations. These are people who are going through that vetting process and who have been forced out of their country completely due to the reasons that we listed before. Besides that, you'll see that green bar, the green number, the second line there, 45.7 million internally displaced people. That means more than the 26 million refugees currently in the world. Almost 46 million are internally displaced, meaning their homes, they've lost everything. They fit this definition of a refugee. They've lost safety, they've lost any sort of normalcy in their lives, but they haven't actually made it to a refugee camp. They haven't left their country. They may be in other spots in their country. They may have found family who they are living with indefinitely. That number is 46 million almost, bringing the total to about almost 80 million people forcibly displaced worldwide at the end of last year. That number, when I did a little bit of looking, is the size of Texas. That is almost the size of Texas, almost the size of one of the biggest states in the United States. And if you can, I like to compare and visually, and I know you'll see the graphs, I love that stuff. For me, visualizing what would our response be as a country, what would our responses be individually if we saw in the news that the entire state of Texas was wiped out? Everybody in the state of Texas had to go elsewhere. No matter what the cause of that would be, maybe it's environmental, maybe there's war, whatever it might be in your mind, what could our response be? Emotionally, what would that bring up in us if we lost an entire state in the Union? So this is just showing very broadly, what we're looking at as far as refugee crises in the world. It's a little bit misleading because this map is actually showing where refugees are resettling and where internally displaced people are most prevalent. But really what it gives you is a good map of where these crises are happening in the world. Because a lot of refugees aren't going across oceans. They aren't going even to north in the same continent. They're just going to the next country over. A lot of refugees end up, so we'll use Rwanda as an example, from Rwanda to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And many of those refugees will live the rest of their lives there in refugee camps or makeshift living situations. And some of those, a fraction of those, will be able to go to a third country, such as America or somewhere in Europe or Australia. So really, visually, this is just kind of showing you the level of crisis, the level of turmoil we have going on in the world. The UN currently is tracking 28 different specific crises in the world. These are independent crises, whether it's war or environmental disasters, those sorts of things. 28 different crises in the world that's causing the visualization that you see up there. So, what's the United States response been to this? I put this up here just to show where we stand, where we stand, the United States of America, in refugee issues and in our acceptance, our treatment of refugees. Because the sobering reality is, as you see, and it's quite small now, but on a couple slides above, I'll just go back to it, real quick. We see a significant uptick in the last decade. And as I mentioned, we are at historical numbers we've never seen before with refugee resettlement. In the past 4 years, refugee resettlement in the United States has gone down dramatically. You see, and this goes back to 1980, and we're a totally different time of immigration and what that looked like for the United States. But you look back even 4 years, we had 85,000 refugees resettled in 2016. The cap for this year was down to 18,000. That means at most we could settle 18,000 refugees in the United States. The actual number to date is 11,841 refugees. And there's a variety of reasons for that. A lot of the methods that we would use to help refugees move through that vetting process have been taken away. A lot of the structure, the infrastructure around how we bring refugees into the country has been stripped down. The proposed cap for 2021, if you can read that up there, is 13,000. That sets a historic low for the number of refugees that the United States is willing to accept. And you'll see from this year, we didn't even hit that number. We didn't even get to the point that they're proposing for next year. But what I really want to visualize and I really want to drive home is that during a historic, unprecedented, I know it's a word used far too often these days with the pandemic, but unprecedented refugee crisis, we're seeing equally unprecedented restrictions on how many refugees we can help in this country, how many we're even allowed as people to help. Again, sorry. The colors? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. I should explain that. We're looking at, and again, it's small lettering right up there. The blue is the annual ceiling. That is the cap that is proposed by the White House every year and approved by Congress as the number of refugees that we can accept in that given fiscal year. So that's what that blue line represents. That's how many refugees, as a country, we've agreed through the federal government that we can accept that year. That orange line represents the actual number of admitted refugees that came in during that year. Generally, it follows pretty well. During the early 2000s, you'll see really 2002, 2003, and beyond, really lining up with the events of September 11. Refugee admissions were very much tightened, even though the cap remained higher. But generally, the admissions follow pretty close with what the proposed cap is. And again, that goes into, we could spend lots of time kind of on the infrastructure, and that the cap number really defines the funding opportunities and the infrastructure that's put in place to meet that cap number. So asylum, this is the thing that maybe you've heard more about in the news lately, and this is what we're talking about when we talk about the southern border. We can't really talk about refugees and immigrants without talking about asylum right now, because this is kind of where, as a country, we're really focused in a lot of ways. So what's the difference? What are we talking about when we talk about asylum? So very simply, the United States State Department defines an asylee as a person who meets the definition of a refugee and is already present in the United States or is seeking admission at a port of entry. So this is kind of alluding back to what I was talking about before. These are the people who have nowhere else to go, come to our door and say, I've been driven from my home. The gangs are trying to kill my family. Any number of reasons. My farm was burned to the ground. I have nothing left. There's no one to help me. Can I stay in your country? Can I work? Can I support my family in your country? This is ideally happening, like it says, at a port of entry, and is a part of international and U.S. law. Granting asylum and working through asylum cases is encoded in the laws that the federal government is obligated to follow. Most of the individuals coming to our border to claim asylum are coming from the Northern Triangle, as you'll see highlighted in red there. The numbers here, I believe, represent not just believe, I know they represent the homicide rates in each country. So that number there is per 100,000 people, meaning in Guatemala, about 27 people per 100,000 people are murdered. El Salvador, that's 82, almost 83 people per 100,000 people are murdered. To compare, it's hard to just take that statistic on its own. The United States, that's only 5.5 people per 100,000 people. Dealing with very dangerous areas, generally related to gang violence, cartels, drug trade, and trafficking, those sorts of things, really causing the violence there and driving people away from their homes and away from the communities, villages that they come from. So Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, those are the three countries that we mainly see asylum seekers come from. Mexico is also another big country, but usually when we're talking about asylum seekers, we're talking, especially children, we're talking Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. So with all that information, and again, this is very broad, we'll have time for questions afterwards, kind of defining, again, what we're talking about when we're talking about people coming to the United States, when we're talking about refugees, asylum seekers. I highlighted those two big arrows in red, because those are the ones that we're talking about when we talk about refugees and asylees. That top arrow, refugee resettlement, again, they are classified as refugees by the UNHCR and Department of Homeland Security. They're vetted by the U.S. Department of State. They enter the United States at that point with a classification, with a visa, with papers, basically. And they are already moving through the process of getting status in the United States and have a pathway to getting legal permanent residence, those sorts of things. That C arrow, those are people fleeing persecution and requesting asylum at the border. The same reasons that refugees are requesting to be resettled. The same reasons they're requesting, but just doing it at the border. Once they set foot on U.S. soil, the United States is required to entertain a claim for asylum. They usually do so after they're detained by Customs and Border Patrol. They go through asylum hearings. They do not have status while they're here. They do not have status until a judge, an immigration judge, grants them asylum, or there's a variety of other statuses that they can apply for. Then they're set on the journey towards legal permanent residence, citizenship eventually, and are able to get a work permit and work legally in the United States. Oh, whoops, okay. So that is the extremely broad overview umbrella of what immigration looks like across the world and what that looks like in the United States, how we're entering into that as a country. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what is Bethany Christian Services? Why am I standing up here talking about refugee issues as a representative of Bethany, as someone who works at Bethany, as someone who's passionate about these things? What is Bethany's role in this, and why are we here? So I'm sure some of you have heard the Bethany Christian Services name, might know a little bit about it, might know people who have engaged with us as an organization. But just very briefly, Bethany Christian Services, our core mission statement: demonstrating the love and compassion of Jesus Christ by protecting children, empowering youth, and strengthening families through quality social services. So as mentioned in my introduction, I'm very focused on the children, the youth part of this, and so that's where a lot of my expertise lies, and that's where a lot of my passion lies as well. And that's really where Bethany really focuses a lot of their services as well. I know as a church you guys have sponsored refugee families, and I'm not sure if that was through Bethany or not, but that's also something we really strive to do as well, is help families who are coming into the United States and have no knowledge of cultural norms, of what they're getting themselves into, help them land on their feet and help them get the help that they need. Together, we can change the world through family. This is the mantra that I live by. We can change the world through family, and you'll see the way our approaches to how we do this are a lot different than some of the other ways that children and families are treated in the system. And we really pride ourselves and really hold on to that hope that refugees come with, that immigrants come with, that hope that life can be better here. And what does that mean? What does that look like? What does that mean for a family to really settle in and realize that hope? For a youth to settle in with a family, an unaccompanied youth to settle in with a family that maybe they were strangers before they got here, a foster family. What does it look like for them to settle in and feel safe, to feel like they can do this, they can live here, they could have a life here? Family is everything. Is another catchphrase at Bethany, but really, it really just keeps the focus on family and what we do to help realize that hope that families have. So really briefly, Christian organization, we've been around for 75 years, serving all kinds of different demographics and youth, dozens of different programs across the country. We're operating in, I believe, 9 different countries at this point, but you'll see on the map we're United States, based in the United States, in Grand Rapids, but throughout South America, Africa, Europe, really there's a large focus on global operations and being a presence globally. Oops. We're in 33 states, I believe, again, based in Grand Rapids, but operating throughout the country. And really to focus back into the refugee immigrant side of things, Bethany really helps refugee and immigrant families and youth with 3 different umbrellas that we'll kind of group this into. Adult and family resettlement is the first one. That's the one where churches are coming alongside of families and are helping Bethany and helping a certain family connect with resources in their community. Even if that's just, hey, this is the grocery store, here's the bus route to get to the grocery store. I could give you a ride to the grocery store. When you go through a checkout line, this is what you have to do. Some of those simple things that people might not have any idea, might not have any familiarity with to navigate life. Unaccompanied refugee minors. So the youth that Bethany works with, outside of the youth that are part of families already, are unaccompanied, meaning they're coming to the United States, whether it's on the border or whether that's through a refugee camp. They're coming to the United States without parents or guardians. They are by themselves. They come to us and are placed in foster homes and have various different goals that we'll get into a little bit in a moment. So, again, my expertise is the youth side of things, not necessarily the adult and family side. If I can get this video to work, I'm going to very much try. Are you able to press play back there? There should be a bar that pops up right beneath the slide. If not, we won't spend too much time on it. I can just kind of describe what that program is about. Okay, no problem. No problem. The Adult and Family Resettlement Program, the video would have shown Christine Van Ord. She's our Adult and Family Resettlement Director, Program Manager, I believe, actually is her title. Really focused, like I said, on finding employment opportunities for adults, connecting them with churches. A huge focus is with adults and families on finding church families who are willing to partner with these families who really we couldn't do it without a church, without a church partner, without people like you who are willing to enter into it. I think it's turns out to be a very symbiotic relationship. We really help each other a lot. Where Bethany is able to really engage in the procedural and financial support for families and really help them find some of those resources, while the church family really is that community that just wraps their arms around a refugee family and really makes them feel loved, gives them that sense of community, gives them that sense of safety, fulfillment of that hope that they can be home here. This can be home for them. Moving on to unaccompanied refugee. Oops, we lost the PowerPoint there. Well, without it, you'll just miss some bullet points and a cute photo of a kid until it can come back up. Unaccompanied Refugee Minor Program. Let's see. There we go. There's our cute kid. These are the youth, like I said, that are coming from overseas generally and have been vetted, have been through this years-long process of really gaining that refugee status and being approved to resettle in a third country. That's what it's called, but basically approved to resettle here in America. this youth here, this was actually taken by foster parents who went on a exploratory missions trip sort of thing to Burma and Bangladesh and visited the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh currently. I don't know if any of you have heard of them. It's currently the largest group of refugee camps, largest concentration of refugees in the world. One of the people groups that I'm quite passionate about, this is a group who as a culture, who as a defined group of people has collectively gone through extraordinary trauma and extraordinary persecution, putting almost the entire population of that culture in a refugee-type situation. This young boy leaning up against a tree at a refugee camp in one of those camps in Bangladesh is one of the young Rohingya boys that was driven from his home during that crisis. So, moving back, I get distracted easily. When they get to America, they're referred to Bethany, placed in a foster home or small group home, depending on the needs, depending on the availability here in this area. They may have family in their home country. They may be seeking a new family in the U.S. We see very, very diverse, diverse situations that these kiddos are coming from. Some of them will come and they will have lost their entire family, whether it be to war or other things, and we'll have the horrific stories, the just heart-wrenching, heartbreaking tales of trauma that they've been through, and are really looking to plant roots and be a part of a family. Some of them really want someone to call mom and dad. They just want some sense of safety, some sense of normalcy. We'll have other youth, generally older youth, who are coming. They might have family in their country, but they're really coming here because they want to start a new life. They want to work. They want to live what America can offer to them. They want to start supporting themselves. They want to escape, again, the tragedy, the trauma, the horrific circumstances that they ran from, but really want to have that identity already. They're not necessarily looking for a new family to call mom and dad, brother and sister. They just want a place to support them while they try to make it here. Either way, foster families are the essential, most vital part of that process. None of these kids could do it without the work that people do, the incredible sacrifices that foster parents make to make that happen. And it's not easy. It's not easy. The level of resiliency and stamina that I've seen, not just from the youth, but from foster families as well, as they take youth into their home and are opening up their family to a stranger, essentially, getting to know them and growing close to them. It's just amazing to watch, and it keeps my passion alive, just watching people like that enter into and be a part of youth's lives like that. So this is another video. I won't try to pull this one up, but just an example of a refugee foster family and just testimony, really, to just how enriching it is, not just for the youth in the home, not just for these kids who come in. It's so enriching for the foster parents and the foster family to really get a sense of what another culture, bringing that into your home, looks like, what another youth of another religion what that could look like in your home. The things you learn from people from a totally different part of the world that you had no idea you didn't know. It's pretty amazing to watch. I know I've learned in my years as case manager and being as a program director, I continue to learn different things about different cultures I had no idea about before. It's amazing to soak in the cultural knowledge that is so diverse across the world. Unaccompanied children is that third umbrella. We'll move through this pretty quickly because I want to have time for questions at the end as well. These are the youth who are traveling sometimes thousands of miles from those countries that were highlighted in red on that map earlier. They're traveling alone sometimes, by themselves, very young ages. I had another video at the end of this to kind of illustrate what that looks like. Sometimes they're hitching a ride aboard trains that are traveling through Mexico up towards the southern border of the United States. This is an incredibly dangerous journey that they undertake. It's not undertaken lightly. Again, this is not something that kids or families do because they feel like it. This is something they do because their home is no longer their safe place for them. It's been taken away. Everything they know and everything they care about has been taken away. Sometimes these kids are as young as 4 or 5 years old, traveling with a coyote or with an older uncle or nephew or maybe even a stranger who their parents have said, look, it's safer for me to send my child with a stranger to this foreign country than it is, than it is for me to keep this child here with me. It's that bad. It's that dangerous. These are the types of situations and the kind of choices that kids are having to make, that parents are having to make when kids are traveling. So these little graphics are walking through sort of the process of how youth comes to be with Bethany. I won't go through all of them. Basically, they're apprehended at the border and referred to us through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And at that point, they go into what we call transitional foster care. Our number one priority at that point is to find family here in the United States. Family is everything. We change the world through family, and that doesn't just mean foster families. That means making sure kids are with their families if at all possible. That could mean a parent who's already in the United States. That could mean an aunt or an uncle or a very close family friend who they know, who they are comfortable with. This person, we call a sponsor. The sponsor goes through a pretty intense vetting process to ensure that we're sending these youth to a safe place, that these people are actually who they say they are. They're not traffickers. They're not trying to exploit these youth for work, for sex, for drugs, for anything like that. We go through this process with the sponsors, and about 95% of the time, we reunify youth with family in the United States when they come into transitional foster care. Occasionally, these youth go back to their country of origin. They choose to. It's called voluntary departure. Sometimes they go into a program called long-term foster care. So maybe they don't have family, they don't have a sponsor here in the United States who can care for them. They don't have someone to go to. They're generally older kids who, again, maybe traveled by themselves. They don't know anybody here. Long-term foster care is that next step. That's going back into what we kind of talked about with unaccompanied refugee minors, where they're going to a family. Maybe it's the same family that they were with when they were in transitional foster care. They're going to this family to really start building a life for themselves, to really put down roots here in the United States, and to develop their own identity here in America. So again, we'll skip over this video. Talking really briefly, what can we do? The first thing that we can do, every single person, including me in this room, is educate ourselves. There is a wealth of misinformation about refugees, immigrants, the processes that we go through, the laws that we have, the situations in their country of origin. There's a wealth of misinformation about that out there. And many times it takes reading past the headlines to really understand what is going on, the nuances of an issue. So I encourage everybody, no matter who you are, just to educate yourself, just to keep an open mind and to be proactive in understanding these issues, because it's so complicated. It can't just be captured in a headline. There's not one sentence that will tell you what the situations these people are coming from might look like. Immigration law is said to be second only to tax law in its level of complication and just difficulty to understand. So while I try to stay away from some of the nuances of that here, I encourage people to dive into that on their own just to understand the process that immigrants, when they are here, have to go through. Refugees have to go through when they're here just to keep their status, to stay in this country and not be deported. Advocacy and action really go hand in hand. When you're educated, you're in a position to help advocate and to help teach others, to help friends, family. Change and heartfelt passion in communities starts with individuals. It starts with you here. It starts with me being vocal about the things, the wrong that we see in the world, and the ways that we can help, the ways that we can be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ to these people. And that just going into action, there's always a need. There's always a need for churches to help come alongside refugee families who might be hurting, might be here, like I said, without that sense of what to do when you get to your new home. What does that look like? How do I buy food? How do I go down to the store? How do I read this? This is not a language I understand. And as far as foster care, there's also always a need for foster parents, for people who are willing to invite youth into their home. It's scary. It's not easy. I'm not the person who will stand up here and say, this is going to be great. You're going to have a loving child in your home, and it's going to be happy butterflies. You're going to learn so much. All of those good things can, and I'm confident they would happen, but it comes with a lot of uncomfortableness and a lot of adjustment and a lot of openness, a lot of prayer, and being intentional about who you are as a family and how you will respect this youth that is coming into your home as well. And there's different capacities for that. Right here in Holland, the programs that I direct are for those transitional foster care and long-term foster care programs. And we're always recruiting and specifically looking to grow right now as we have seen an incredible community response to these issues, an incredible capacity in the Holland area to serve these youth and to be the hands and feet of Jesus in this community to these youth. Transitional foster care is a 30 to 90-day commitment usually, sometimes shorter, sometimes a little bit longer. Very short term. Long-term foster care can be a couple years. In really having this youth and having them be a part of your family in some capacity. So from the Bethany side, that's what I'd love to introduce to you as ways that right here in this community we can help be that for youth. Outside of that, advocacy and helping educate your family members is great. And there's only so much we can do for something on as grand of a scale as a nation of laws and regulations and rules and just ways we can help affect that. Calling your congressman, congresswoman, calling the White House. There's numbers for that as well. Being proactive and making your voice heard. It's kind of like voting. We're one drop in the bucket, but enough drops in the bucket can affect change and does affect change. And I've seen that happen and know that movements can make a difference. And again, start with individuals. They start with us right here, and being proactive in that. So, with that, I hope there was some understanding and some more knowledge that I could share about this topic with you guys that maybe you didn't know before. I know it's very broad and it's a very broad topic, like I said before. So I think hopefully maybe we can go a little bit over since we started late, but would love to open it up for questions from you guys. Happy to answer any specific inquiry that you might have about any of these issues.
Is it on? Yes. I have to have it, sorry.
Have any of these groups looked at the future where climate change, my number I've heard is 1.2 billion people are going to have to move in the world or die? The whole world organizations have to start saying, how do we do this?
Yeah, it's a huge kind of impending, this thing kind of hanging over everyone's heads, right? It's already starting to happen too. A lot of the reasons people are immigrating from places like Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala are more and more because their land is uninhabitable. They can't grow their food anymore because the climate has not allowed them to grow what their family has grown for decades on that land. They don't have anywhere else to go. They can't go to the farm next door and grow. It's the same thing there. So these families who might have had the same land in their family for centuries really are having to uproot and leave because they just don't have the resources dried up. The resource is gone. So climate is a huge factor there as well. And that's something we're already seeing. And that's the statistic, 1.2 billion people. That's I agree with you. That's something we have to, as a global collective of human beings, start taking into account as we think about what that will look like for people who will be displaced, as more people continue to be displaced from that.
The news media sometimes tends to portray most of the people that want to come here as bad actors, people who are coming here to create trouble and dissension. I'm sure there is a percentage of people who would be qualified as bad actors. What is your response to that image that's been created?
My entire response would take far too long to get into. Obviously, doing the work I do, I'm very passionate, and I am fortunate enough to have firsthand experience with youth who are in this exact situation. I can tell you that none of the youth that I have encountered are bad actors. The statistics just don't show that that's the case. The vast majority of people coming across our southern border are doing it for reasons like I mentioned. They're doing it because they have to. They're doing it because they don't have another choice. It's safer for them to leave everything they know behind than it is to stay in their homes. I don't have the exact numbers, the exact statistics on me right now, but I can tell you it's a very, very small percentage that is trying to come to the United States with any sort of ill intent. You talk about gangs like MS-13, some of the more common things to be referenced in the news media or social media or what have you. MS-13 originated in the United States, actually. That was not a foreign gang that infiltrated America. That gang started in Los Angeles, made its way back south when people were deported to their countries, and has just exploded, but isn't something where they're sending troops here to take over. It's the statistics and the facts just don't support that, and that's another thing, another reason to dive in past the headlines, and that's all I can really say on that. Please educate yourselves, because the facts are there. The facts are there to be seen, to be heard. It just takes kind of diving in a little intentionally, especially with an issue as nuanced and complicated as this.
In order to educate ourselves with unbiased information, what resources can you recommend?
I recommend going to the United Nations website directly for refugee issues. Sometimes they'll link to other news sources, but they're really generally a good source of information. A lot of the humanitarian, many times religiously affiliated humanitarian organizations working with refugees are good resources as well. International Refugee Committee, IRC, is one. Bethany, if you follow them on social media or something, will generally have stories about refugees, and they try to do a pretty good job of distilling some of these complicated issues into something that's more understandable. There's, as far as news outlets, news media to look at, I guess I couldn't, I can't make a recommendation that's not going to come off as politically one-sided or not. And kind of like I mentioned before, this is a political issue, and we're diving into that now. But some of the more fact-based reporting that I've seen comes from AP, Associated Press, Politico, kind of staying away from any of the larger major news outlets, whether that's Fox or CNN or MSNBC. Some of those tend to be more editorialized and opinionated than fact-based reporting. ProPublica, they do a lot of original reporting and research into many different issues, but immigration issues is one thing that they've been very, very keen on. There's also Netflix documentary right now. I'm totally blanking on the name, but it's the documentary following ICE agents as they do some of their raids and some of their patrols and stops. Really interesting stuff. Really first-person documentary style. Yeah, a lot of good resources out there. I can, try to share kind of this PowerPoint, but also some resources as well after the presentation, I think Dave, I have his contacts and can get him some of that stuff as well.
Baker would be willing to pass that on. If you get it to us, that'd be great.
Of course, yeah.
Any other questions? Of course, Jay, you're all the way across the room.
The unaccompanied youth that you work with, could you explain just briefly what they go through at the border? Some are there probably months or years even. Do they get educated? What kind of housing do they have? And how does Bethany acquire those youths? Is there a quota that you have to do with, or how that process all works, please?
Yeah. Very kind of boiling it down very briefly. The process at the border, United States law based on the Flores settlement requires Customs and Border Patrol to refer a youth who they've apprehended to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, who is our contractor, within 72 hours of apprehension. So theoretically, these youth are spending 72 hours or less at the border. Now, my experience in my, what I have heard from youth firsthand is that that's not occurring. A lot of these youth are kept for 5 to 10 days at the border sometimes, especially when it's an influx. I heard some really terrible stories of how they're treated, where they're kept. One of the more common things to hear is the youth will call it the ice box. And they're kept in a small room with no windows for 5 to 10 days, where the air conditioning, they're in the middle of the desert and the air conditioning is turned down to a level where they're shivering in their rooms, not given blankets. They're not allowed outside of the room except to use the bathroom. Their food is given to them in the room. And this is a story we didn't just get a group of kids that were like, yeah, we all experience this together. This is one youth last year said this was happening, and another youth 3 months ago said this was happening, and another youth 6 months ago, totally separate, unconnected stories that are completely lining up. This is just no way for it to be a fabrication. And no reason for the youth to lie either. We report that back, and part of what Bethany does is advocate on behalf of the kids and back to Homeland Security and say, look, this is not right. This is A, illegal. It's B, horrific and inhumane. I still struggle to wrap my mind around how that sort of thing, and more, that's just kind of one story, how that sort of thing can happen in a country like the United States. And a country with the values that we hold here in the United States. So that's a long way to answer that very small piece, that 72 hours is what they're theoretically required to refer to Office of Refugee Resettlement, who in turn refers to an agency like Bethany. Here in Holland, we have a contract for 24 transitional foster care youth. So with the short-term nature, they're kind of cycling in and out. As soon as we find a sponsor for them, we send them home. We send them with their family, and then we intake more youth. With the long-term foster care program, we have an 8-bed contract currently. So total, we're working with 32-ish youth at a time here in the Holland area. There's 4 other Bethany sites in Michigan, and then 8 more around the country who have different contracts. They, as a total, make up, I believe, about 4% of ORR's bed capacity nationally. ORR, Office of Refugee Resettlement, has capacity for about 20,000 youth, I believe. And Bethany is just a very, very small part of that. But what we've been able to do with transitional foster care is set the standard for care for these youth. It's our belief, again, that family is the key. Family is important, even when it's a transitional time. The youth that are referred to Office of Refugee Resettlement and go to a large bed shelter, and that's probably most likely what you might have seen in the news, things like that. They're packed in there. There's sometimes a couple thousand youth at a time in one shelter. We have really strived to go against that, and even though it's a little bit more of a strain on resources, we really believe that, no, this one youth, these brothers and sisters deserve to be with a family. They can't be separated in this shelter with thousands of other kids. So what we're trying to do is place these kids with families, really changing the way the system works in a way. And we've been able to successfully do that so far in a way that we're pretty connected to policymakers in Washington and some of the, we have national recognition in that way to be as sort of the innovator is this program that's doing it differently. I will say before they even reach the border, they're spending sometimes a good year, 6 months, on the short end, 3 months-ish, traveling from maybe it's Guatemala through Mexico to the United States. And then crossing the border has become extremely difficult at the ports of entry due to recent policy changes, things like that. Hopefully that kind of answers your question.
I'm thinking we've gone beyond the time, and I thank you for coming, and would you please join me in thanking Adam for his presentation?
Thank you, guys. Thanks so much for coming out. I appreciate the masks and just the safety taken. And again, thank you guys for coming out to learn a little bit more about this issue. Really, really appreciate it. Please don't hesitate to reach out. My contact info was up there very briefly, but I also have some cards I could give you if you have more questions and wanted to.
And Lori